What could make a millionaire CEO abandon his lavish life to kneel in the dirt for a homeless child? Jason Ward, a man who had it all, wealth, power, and a life many could only dream of, was about to face something that would change everything. He thought he was living the dream, ticking off all the boxes of success. But on one ordinary evening, something so unexpected happened that it cracked open his entire world. This isn't just a story about charity, it's about a man who believed he had seen it all, until a single encounter shattered his perfect life. What happened next would not only break his heart, but also force him to confront his own purpose, his own choices, and the life he had built. Before we dive into this story, comment below, where in the world are you watching from? Hit the subscribe button and turn on notification. The penthouse suite was nothing short of spectacular, floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic views of the city skyline. The expensive art pieces on the walls, the sleek furniture that screamed sophistication, and the meticulously crafted decor all served as constant reminders of his success. He had it all. Yet, when the silence of his home echoed, he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that settled deep within him. His office at WardTech Innovations was just as grand, glass walls, state-of-the-art technology, and an entire team of executives under his command. He managed billion-dollar projects, made international deals, and pushed the company further into the global spotlight. But when the noise of the office died down and the doors closed behind him, he was left with the same gnawing sensation. It wasn't enough. His life had become a series of transactions, money moving from one account to another, deals being sealed in polished boardrooms, and power expanding across continents. But none of it mattered. None of it filled him. Jason had become numb to the world, unable to connect with anyone beyond the shallow interactions of business. Every day, he followed the same routine. Mornings were spent in back-to-back meetings, discussing numbers and projections. The afternoon was filled with phone calls, more meetings, and endless strategy sessions. By the time evening came, Jason was drained. His chauffeur-driven car waited for him outside the office, ready to whisk him away to his mansion, a cold, lonely place that was meant to be his sanctuary. But it wasn't. The drive home was always silent. The car moved through the streets, passing by the same familiar landmarks, and Jason would often stare out of the window, his thoughts drifting. The city below seemed alive, but he felt detached, like an outsider looking in. At home, he would sit in front of his television, but the flickering images failed to hold his attention. His mind was elsewhere, but it didn't know where. One night, as the car made its way down a side street, something caught Jason's eye, a small figure on the corner, standing alone in the shadow of a building. It was a girl. No older than 8. She wore ragged clothes, the fabric torn in places, and her face was smeared with dirt. She held a small cardboard sign, her tiny fingers barely able to grip it. Jason's eyes locked on hers for a brief moment, her gaze a mixture of fear and vulnerability. The world around them seemed to pause. For the first time in what felt like years, Jason's heart skipped a beat. The girl stood there, barely visible in the dim light of the street lamp, but something about her presence struck him with an intensity he couldn't ignore. She looked so fragile, so small against the harsh backdrop of the city. Jason had seen homelessness before, seen countless people in need on the streets, but this was different. This girl's eyes were filled with something he couldn't name, a story untold, an innocence lost. Jason's mind raced, trying to make sense of the moment. Why did this girl, out of all the people in the city, stand out to him? What was it about her that unsettled him so deeply? He couldn't explain it. His gaze was fixed on her, even as the car continued its journey down the road. The girl quickly looked down at the ground, breaking their brief connection. Jason watched her retreat into the shadows, and for a moment, he almost thought it was an illusion. But no. She was real. And so was the feeling she had sparked within him. Without thinking, Jason looked toward his driver. "Stop the car." Henry, the driver, looked at him with a raised brow but obeyed the command without hesitation. The car came to a halt just a few feet away from where the girl stood. Jason opened the door, stepped out onto the pavement, and walked toward her, the sound of his footsteps the only noise in the still night. The girl didn't move. She didn't look up, just clutched the cardboard sign tightly in her hands. Jason hesitated for a moment. There was something about this girl that made him pause, something he couldn't put into words. He crouched down in front of her, his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to steady his breath. "Hey," he said gently, his voice breaking the silence. "Are you okay?" The girl didn't respond immediately. Her eyes flickered up to meet his, and in that brief moment, Jason saw something that shook him to his core: of vulnerability, pain, and a longing for something he couldn't understand. It was as if she had seen too much for her age, too much for anyone to bear. Jason swallowed hard. He had no idea what he was doing here or why he was kneeling on the cold street in front of this child, but he couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when something deep inside him was telling him to stay. "Do you need help?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. The girl looked away, her eyes downcast. She didn't speak at first, but the weight of her silence spoke volumes. Jason's mind raced again. Was this his moment? Was he supposed to do something? Could he make a difference for this girl? Or was this just another fleeting moment in a city full of them? He watched as she finally spoke, her voice barely audible, but it was enough. I don't have anywhere to go," she said. "I just want to be safe." Jason's heart broke. His gaze swept over her again, taking in the ragged clothes, the thin frame, and the uncertainty in her eyes. He had seen countless figures like her before: the homeless, the broken, the invisible. But Dessler, this girl, was different. She was more than just a face in the crowd. She was a child, lost and alone, in a world that had failed her. Jason stood up, his mind made up. "Stay here," he said, more to himself than to her. He turned back toward the car and rushed inside. "Henry, take me to the nearest store. We need to get some food, now." Jason's words hung in the air, his actions driven by something far more powerful than he had anticipated. As Henry started the car and pulled away, Jason glanced back toward the corner where Dessler stood. The city around him seemed to fade into the background as the weight of his decision settled in. He wasn't just helping a child on the street, he was about to confront the very emptiness that had consumed him for so long. Jason's feet seemed heavy as he walked back to the corner where Dessler stood, still clutching her cardboard sign. There was a flutter of uncertainty in his chest. How do you speak to a child like her? What do you say to someone so young who has already seen the worst of the world? As he approached, she didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply stood there, her eyes fixed on the ground, too aware of the harsh world around her to meet his gaze again. "Hey, it's me again," Jason said awkwardly, his voice soft but uncertain. He crouched in front of her, trying his best not to tower over her. "I'm Jason." She didn't look up. He wasn't sure what he expected, but he hoped for something more, perhaps a thank you, or at least a hint of recognition. But all he got was silence. He looked down at the cardboard sign she was still clutching, almost as if it were a part of her. "I got some food for you," Jason said, his voice wavering slightly as he reached into the bag he'd gotten from the store. "It's just a little something. But it's for you." Dessler slowly raised her head, meeting his eyes just for a second, before quickly looking back down. Jason's heart tightened. She was wary, cautious, and maybe even frightened. "Here, it's all yours," he said gently, handing her the bag. There was a pause before Dessler's small hands took it, her fingers trembling slightly. She looked at the food, then at him, before whispering the words that would stay with Jason forever. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice was small, fragile, but there was something about it, something that carried an old sadness. Jason sat down beside her on the curb. He didn't know why he stayed. It wasn't a logical choice, it was just something he felt compelled to do. There was an odd sense of connection, even if neither of them knew where it would lead. "Are you hungry?" Jason asked, trying to keep his tone casual, though inside, he was anything but. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she just nodded, slowly tearing open the bag of food. But before she could take a bite, Jason noticed something in her posture, something that felt off. She wasn't just hungry, she was empty. "What's your name?" Jason asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Dessler," she replied, her voice barely audible. He nodded. "Dessler, where are your parents?" At that, she froze. Her tiny body seemed to stiffen, her eyes darting away as though trying to avoid the question. It was clear she wasn't used to people asking, "Not really." Not with any real concern. After a long pause, Dessler looked up at Jason, her eyes deep with the weight of unspoken things. "Mom, she died last year," Dessler said, her voice still soft but heavier now, like she was saying the words she'd been carrying for too long. "And Dad, he left a long time ago. He didn't come back." The words hit Jason like a punch to the gut. He'd been prepared for many things, but not this. Not this deep, raw truth. Dessler's voice was too old for her age. Her small frame, barely 9 years old, seemed to carry the weight of someone much older. Jason swallowed hard, his mind racing. "Where do you sleep?" he asked, hoping to keep the conversation going, hoping to pull her back from whatever dark place she had drifted to in that moment. "In an alley," she replied flatly, looking away. "It's warm enough at night." There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness. Just a simple statement. A child who had long ago learned that the world didn't owe her anything. Jason's heart sank further, and he found himself struggling to keep his composure. He couldn't let her see him fall apart. Not now. Not in front of her. The question that had been lingering in his mind for some time now surfaced once again, and this time, it felt more urgent. "Do you have anyone else? Anyone who can help you?" She looked at him again, the silence between them growing heavier. "Just me," Dessler whispered. Jason stood up, the weight of her words settling over him like a thick fog. He was a man who had spent years building his empire, controlling every detail of his life, and yet, here he was, struggling to understand how something like this little girl, had slipped through the cracks of everything he thought he knew. He felt a sense of guilt, something foreign to him. How could he have so much, everything, and still feel so hollow? How could a girl so young have experienced so much loss, so much pain? "I'm sorry, Dessler," he whispered. He didn't know if he meant it for her, or for himself. She didn't respond, but the silence between them felt like an answer in itself. He could feel the tension in her, the guarded way she carried herself. Dessler wasn't a child who expected help. She was a child who had learned not to expect anything at all. The following days were filled with frustration. Jason called every shelter he could find, desperate to help Dessler. But the responses were always the same, overwhelmed, underfunded, and with long waiting lists. The system was broken, and no matter how many calls he made, he couldn't fix it. Jason's mind spun with anger and helplessness. There were thousands of children just like Dessler out there, stuck in a cycle that was nearly impossible to break. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about one little girl. This was about a system that had failed her. And it was about a man who had spent too long hiding behind his wealth and success to see the truth. "I can't just sit by and do nothing," Jason muttered to himself one evening, staring at the papers and calls strewn across his desk. He couldn't fix the system on his own, but maybe he could make a difference for Dessler. He called his legal team, telling them he wanted to explore options. He reached out to child advocates, social workers, anyone who could help. Jason wasn't just going to give up. Not this time. As Jason sat in his office, the reality of his decision finally hit him. It wasn't just about one girl. This was about who he wanted to be. For years, Jason had let his success define him. He had let his company, his wealth, his power define his worth. But that evening on the street, when Dessler had looked up at him with those eyes full of pain and hope, Jason realized something fundamental. He wasn't just a CEO. He wasn't just a man who made deals and pushed companies forward. He was a man who had the power to change something. To help someone. This wasn't about doing the right thing for a tax break or a reputation boost. This was about making things right. Not just for Dessler, but for every person, every child, who was struggling. If this moment hits you, pause and share this video. Someone out there needs to hear Dessler's story. They need to understand that we can make a difference, one person at a time. Because the truth is, we all have the power to change someone's world. And it starts with us, right here, right now. The first night Dessler spent in her new home was unlike any other. For the first time in what seemed like forever, she wasn't scared to close her eyes. The room was small, but it was warm and safe, things she had long forgotten the meaning of. Jason had bought her a stuffed animal, a simple plush bear. It wasn't expensive, but to Dessler, it felt like a treasure. She clutched it tightly as she lay in bed, the softness of the bear comforting her in a way that nothing else ever had. It wasn't just the bear that gave her comfort, though. It was the feeling of having a place to sleep, a place where she wasn't afraid of the dark, a place where no one could hurt her. For the first time, Dessler felt the kind of peace that children should always have, but rarely did. Jason had watched her for a moment after handing her the bear. Her eyes, usually clouded with uncertainty, now seemed brighter. She still wasn't smiling, not yet, but there was a shift. She wasn't the same little girl who had looked at him with suspicion and caution just days ago. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. As he stood by the door, watching her drift off to sleep, Jason couldn't help but feel a wave of relief. She was safe. Finally, she was safe. But for Jason, this was only the beginning. Dessler's story had ignited something in him. A fire that burned with the desire to make a real difference. He couldn't simply walk away and forget about the countless others like her, struggling in the shadows, invisible to the world. He launched a foundation for homeless youth, an initiative he called Dawn of Hope. Using the same business acumen that had built WardTech Innovations, Jason threw himself into the cause, working tirelessly to secure funding, build partnerships, and create a network of support for kids like Dessler. Jason applied everything he knew about business to social good. He organized charity galas, leveraged his company's connections, and used his influence to raise awareness. It wasn't just about writing checks, it was about creating lasting change. The foundation provided shelters, education, and counseling for homeless children, focusing on long-term solutions rather than short-term fixes. Jason knew that his role was more than just a donor, it was to be a driving force behind a movement. But more than that, he wanted to prove that people like him, people with privilege and power, could use their resources for something greater than themselves. His success wasn't just about wealth anymore, it was about creating a legacy, a new kind of success that was measured not in dollars, but in lives changed. As Jason's foundation grew, so did his voice. He began speaking at charity galas, spreading the message about the realities of child homelessness. At first, it was just a few people in a room. But soon, his speeches reached thousands, people who could make a difference, people who were inspired to take action. We are living in a world where millions of children go to bed every night without a safe place to sleep. In the United States alone, over 1.5 million children experience homelessness every year. And the number is growing. Jason's words were met with silence, not out of indifference, but because they struck a chord. The statistics were staggering, but the faces behind them were even more haunting. For the first time, people were beginning to understand that homelessness wasn't just an issue, it was a crisis. And it wasn't just about adults. Children, the most vulnerable members of society, were suffering the most. Jason's speeches were filled with urgency. He spoke not only about the issues at hand but about the potential for change. He used his platform to raise funds, but more importantly, he used it to shift perspectives. He wanted people to understand that homelessness was not just a statistic. It was a lived reality for too many children who deserved better. Through his efforts, Jason's foundation became a beacon of hope. But more than that, it became a call to action. The ripple effect was undeniable. Other organizations began to partner with him, and soon, a network of advocates and supporters rallied behind the cause. Years later, Jason would look back on the night he met Dessler, and he would admit something that changed him forever. "I thought I was saving her," he would say, a quiet reflection in his voice. But in truth, she saved me. It was a profound realization. In helping Dessler, he had unlocked a part of himself that he never knew existed, a part of him that cared, that wanted to make a difference. Before meeting her, Jason had been a man consumed by his own success. But Dessler had shown him a different path, a path where success wasn't defined by wealth, but by the ability to help others rise. Jason's life had been transformed by one small act of kindness, and it wasn't just Dessler who had been changed. Jason had become a different man, one driven by purpose and the desire to leave a legacy that would last far beyond his business empire. He had given Dessler a new life, but she had given him something far more valuable in return. A mission, a purpose, and the knowledge that no matter how successful he became, the most important thing he could ever do was help those who couldn't help themselves. If this moment hits you, subscribe and share this video. True success isn't measured by how many zeros are in your bank account, it's measured by the lives you touch, the hearts you change, and the difference you make in the world. Jason Ward's journey proves this. He thought he was helping Dessler, but in the end, it was Dessler who showed him the real meaning of success. When you stop chasing material wealth and start focusing on what truly matters, you discover a purpose far more meaningful than anything you could ever own. Dessler's story changed Jason's life, and now, it's changing all of us. We don't have to be billionaires to make a difference. It only takes one act of kindness to spark a revolution of change. Ring the bell so you never miss a story that matters. Comment below, what's one act of kindness that changed you? We all have the power to change the world around us, one small step at a time. Remember, it's not about the riches you accumulate, but the lives you impact along the way.